Starting with the question at number 10. Who was Buddha anyways? Well, in Sanskrit, Buddha means the awakened one. Now, Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was born in 567 BCE in a wealthy ruling family. One day, while he was out of his palace, he saw three things that really detached him from his privileged life: old men, the sick people, as well as dead people. And that day, he discovered the real sufferings of life. So he wanted to learn more, and he gave up all of his riches and he adopted the lifestyle of a holy man, and he learned meditation from different teachers. Now, he took a minimal diet and meditated under a Bodhi tree. Now, after meditating for 40 consecutive days, he achieved a state of nirvana and ultimately became the Buddha. Now, the rest of his life, he continued teaching people Dharma, which is the essential truths about the nature of existence, the cause of suffering, and how to overcome desire. From there, we move on to the question at number 9. What does Buddhism actually teach anyways? Okay, so in Buddha's first sermon, he said this, and I quote, "I teach just one thing, and only one thing: suffering and the end of suffering." Now, the collection of teachings of Buddhism is known as Dharma, and it covers pretty much every aspect of human existence, from moral and ethical behavior to mental discipline to compassionate service to one another. And now, the ultimate goal of the Dharma is to really help people awaken to the true nature of reality, and also to change their behavior as well as their thought patterns so that they can be completely free from all types of suffering. Buddha explained 4 noble truths, and those are: all existence is dukkha, and dukkha is the inescapable truth of life. Also, the cause of dukkha is craving. The cessation of dukkha comes with the cessation of craving. And finally, there is a path that leads from dukkha. So with all this said so far, it leads us to our next question. Is Buddhism a religion? Well, if one studies Buddhism, it's more like a philosophy than a religion. There are no weekly or daily worships that you need to attend, and no belief in God like other religions. Now, it's a spiritually focused self-help philosophy, although it is often described as a religion due to the various forms of Buddhism that have sprung up in our world today. It gives you the meaning of life, ethics, psychology, human behavior, the nature of consciousness. There's some politics in there as well, and also secular disciplines. But in practice, Buddhism can look like any other religion, like, going through the practice of attaining nirvana, like we just mentioned earlier. Now, another very religious aspect of Buddhism is that it shares supernatural beliefs with other religions. Now, the tales in the religious texts are also attached to the Buddha, and also the belief of the afterlife in Buddhism makes it seem like a religion. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about supernatural beings later on, so stick around with me. For now, we're going to move on to question number 7. Are all Buddhists vegetarian? Because the Buddha taught against harming any sentient creature, some people believe that all Buddhists are pacifists and vegetarian who would never hurt a fly, let alone a cow or even an enemy soldier if they were in war. Now, that, however, is just not the case. Even the Buddha rejected the notion of all Buddhists being vegetarian, although it kind of goes against the Buddhist core notion of no harm, or ahimsa, which again we'll be talking about a little bit later. But next up, we have question number 6. What is karma anyways? Karma in Buddhism is different from karma in Western society. In Buddhism, karma is the universal rule of morally ambiguous cause and effect. Now, it means that your every action, whether it's good or bad, will have certain consequences. That's it. The Buddha defined karma as not only action, but also the intention behind the action. Compassion, generosity, sympathy, kindness, and wisdom motivate good or skillful actions, according to Buddha, whereas hatred, greed, and delusion motivate bad or unskillful actions. So we reach halfway in this episode, guys, and that leads us to question number 5. Who can be a monk? Well, anyone can take the vows of a Buddhist monk or nun and enter the walls of monastic life with proper preparation and sense of commitment. Some monasteries, they offer part-time ordination because, you know, becoming a Buddhist monk or nun is a lifelong commitment. So it's a big commitment for a lot of people. So you can do it part-time in certain instances. Many Buddhist monks and nuns have celibate lives as well. And outside of the monastery, they do not work, earn money. They spend their whole day, you know, just meditating and studying. While on the plus side, you don't really have to worry about the stresses of what to wear or how to style your hair or anything like that. Every day, monks and nuns, they completely shave their heads and wear very simple robes. So yeah, there's no fashion competition going on between them. It's a serious decision in one's life, so before preparation, someone needs to really be certain that they are aware of all the realities of what it means to be a Buddhist monk. Moving on to question number 4, who is the Dalai Lama? He is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, it is believed that Dalai Lama is an enlightened being and has reincarnated more than a dozen times. In this way, he has been teaching Dharma for more than 100 years, and Dalai Lama has written best-selling books for his lay audience that translate Buddhist teachings of compassion and happiness. He also travels the world to speak to people of all religions and backgrounds about the benefits of cultivating a spirit of tolerance, forgiveness, and self-discipline. He is also a political leader of Tibet, but he retired from politics back in the year 2011. Now, the question at number 3 is, why meditate? Meditation is a very common practice in Buddhism, and Buddha taught that meditation is one of the best tools for transforming the mind. The ultimate goal of Buddhism is to change your mind and make it healthy and free of all negative thoughts. So meditation is just a tool to achieve this. Meditation was not always a daily exercise, but now since the start of the 20th century, it's really become a practice that's done daily. Now, meditation aims to get calmness and peace of mind, and Buddhists believe that meditating helps you spend your daily life in a much better way. Meditation is approached differently by the different Buddhist schools. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, practitioners, they attempt to mentally recreate an image of the Buddha or silently repeat a mantra. Now, focusing on the breath and learning to observe passing thoughts and feelings with detachment are 2 common meditative practices in Theravada Buddhism. Moving on to question number 2, what is nirvana? We mentioned it, but I'm going to go into more detail here. It is the most confusing concept in Buddhism, well, for me at least, but I'll try to make it easy for myself and also for you. Nirvana translates to extinguishing, quenching, blowing out, and it comes from the Sanskrit language. But what is extinguishing here? Is it the soul? Well, it couldn't be that because Buddhists, they do not believe in the concept of the soul. The thing that is extinguished, however, is dukkha, the root cause of suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion. If a person can overcome their irrational desires, they will enter a state of unparalleled compassion, peace, and joy known as nirvana. And we end off at question number 1. Do Buddhists believe in a god? Well, there is no concept of one god in Buddhism, but over time we have seen that Buddhists have developed a collection of divine beings called devas who fill their religious texts. Now, today Buddhists throughout Asia, they pray to various gods for protection or for good crops or for health, as well as they pray for other different benefits. So was Buddha himself a god? Well, he says no, but some ancient Buddhist texts teach that Buddha was a god before he was reborn as Siddhartha Gautama.
So Buddhism is a religion that believes that there is life after death, and it began in the region of India around the 6th to 4th century BCE. Now, strangely enough, you might think Buddha is the name of the person that Buddhists look up to and pray to, but actually Buddha is more than a name. It also means the one that is awake or the enlightened one. Now, many people may think that Gautama Buddha is a god or a deity that people of the Buddhist religion look up to and pray to. But that's not necessarily true. He was a man very much like us, and Buddhists know him as the one who brought Buddhism to its current level, reaching the highest level of enlightenment. Also, one thing that's fascinating about Buddhism is there is no central text to tell you what the religion is about. Unlike, say, the Bible or the Quran, Buddhism has many different scriptures, such as the scripture of Pali Canon, which is for the Theravada Buddhist, as well as the Mahayana Sutras, which are for the Mahayana Buddhists. And let's not forget the scriptures that the Vajrayana Buddhists follow. And of course there are other stems of Buddhism as well, but these are the main three. However, with all these scriptures, they may have some subtle differences. The root of Buddhism focuses around the Four Nobles of Truth, and they are the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. And that one feels very long, but why is it all about suffering? Well, this is because Buddhists feel that ignorance and desire is the cause of pain within your and my life. And yes, Buddhists might seem like very calm, collective people. They do, in fact, celebrate and like to party. Compared to other countries, they have a 3-day New Year's festival, but their 3-day New Year's celebration is focused on the first full moon of April instead of January 1st. And of course, they also celebrate Buddha's birthday. Sometimes known as Vasek, it also follows a full moon cycle. And it usually happens in May, at least for the next upcoming years it does. But keep in mind, it wasn't always like this. They didn't celebrate or have an actual kind of date for Buddha's birthday until about the 1950s. Buddha's birthday wasn't official until the very first International Buddhist Conference in 1950, being called the World Fellowship of Buddhists. And it was at that point they decided when this celebration should happen, and this fellowship was founded by Ganapala Malalasakar in what was at the time Colombia, Ceylon. So have you ever seen the symbol of Buddhism? Well, it can get very, very confusing, because the symbol of Buddhism looks very similar to the Nazi symbol. Yeah, the swastika. But just so you know, there is one difference. For example, the swastika of the Nazi Party is tilted slightly, and generally is surrounded by white and red, whereas the lines in the Buddhist swastika are generally straight up and down or left and right. Buddhists are also a huge believer of pro-life and karma. And with that, they feel that suicide is a waste on karma, and as well, Buddhist monks will not kill a single animal. That's right, not even a bug, not even a pest, a rodent, no. So if you got arachnophobia, you're just gonna have to get over it if you want to be a Buddhist. But just because you step on a small bug or an organism and kill it, you're not going to perish for eternity. This is because with your karma, you didn't intend to kill something, but because you accidentally did, you're still good. It also should be noted that there is really no God in Buddhism. It is an inner reflective religion that is about your choices that make you whole. Now, Buddhists also understand that there are gods and gods are out there, but they feel that your inner will can be stronger than a god and that you make your choices and it is not determined by anything else. Now, the one question that I have, and you might be wondering it too, is with Buddhism being such an interesting religion, how many Buddhists are there out in the real world? Well, if you look at China, it is currently the country with the most Buddhists, with approximately 244 million people practicing the Buddhist religion. However, for the world's population, it's really hard to calculate. But they have estimated that there is approximately 488 million to 535 million people in the entire world practicing this way of life. And although China may have the most Buddhists in the world, it's not the country with the highest amount of Buddhists per capita. That goes to Cambodia, which 96% of their citizens practice the religion, with Thailand and Myanmar having over 87% of their people practicing the religion. And if you look at India, where the religion started, there's only about 0.8% of people actually practicing this religion. And that may seem small compared to the Christian faith, which is an estimated 2.2 billion. Buddhism remains to be older and is one of the oldest religions that is still practiced today.
Starting with fact number 10, Buddhism is not a religion. Although it is often labeled as a religion, Buddhism is more of a way of life, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on in this episode. But really, the goal is to reach the state of nirvana, and there's no holy book to follow in Buddhism, but there are many important Buddhist texts that you can read. And heaven and hell, they're not eternal places according to Buddhist teachings either. Next up at number 9, Buddhism started in India. Many people assume that Buddhism actually started in Tibet, And of course, this is largely due to the fact that the most recognized face of Buddhism is the Dalai Lama. And he, by the way, is a spiritual leader who practices and teaches Buddhism from Tibet. However, the first to be called Buddha was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born in India around 567 BCE. And then over many, many years, Buddhism began to spread throughout Tibet and Asia, as well as other parts of the world. All right, for fact number 8, we're going to look a little bit more into the originator of Buddhism. Buddhism originated after Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment. And Buddhism, in a nutshell, is the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. And he, by the way, was believed to be born as a prince, or at least the son of a high-ranking person in society. And after just being frustrated with life, he went out on a long spiritual search for happiness and to end all of his suffering. And after many trials and different paths that he tried, he finally found enlightenment while resting under a Bodhi tree. After his enlightenment, he started to teach other people, and this is how the teachings of Buddhism started to spread. But Siddhartha Gautama, he never claimed to be a prophet of God or anything like that. And also, Buddhism can 100% exist without Buddha. He simply found a way to become enlightened. For fact number 7, now the big question I gotta answer: what is enlightenment anyways? Well, according to Matthew Ricard, who's a Buddhist monk himself, enlightenment is a state of perfect knowledge or wisdom, combined with infinite compassion. Knowledge in this case does not mean merely the accumulation of data or a description of the world of phenomena down to its finest detail. Enlightenment is an understanding of both the relative mode of existence, the way in which things appear to us, and the ultimate mode of existence, which is the true nature of those things. And by the way, this includes our minds as well as the external world. Beautifully put by Matthew Ricard. Moving on from there, we go to number 6. They do not believe in a supreme God. Followers of Buddhism, they don't acknowledge a supreme God or deity at all. They instead focus on achieving enlightenment. There's no supreme God to follow. There's no one to worship. And when followers reach this spiritual level, they're said to have experienced nirvana, which is a transcendent state in which there is neither suffering, desire, nor sense of self. And an individual is released from the effects of karma and the cycle of death and rebirth. This is why Buddhism shouldn't be confused with a religion, as there is no God or supreme being to worship. Next up, I want to look at the term Buddha. What does that even mean anyways? Well, many people think that Buddha is a person, but in actuality, anyone can be a Buddha. It's merely the name of a person who has reached nirvana. Now, Siddhartha Gautama, he was the first to be called Buddha, although there are beliefs that people before him did achieve enlightenment, but after him, there have been several other Buddhas, and this is one of the reasons why the faces of Buddha statues, they often differ. For number 4, I'm going to look at the branches of Buddhism. There was only one teaching of Buddhism initially, that was the one that Siddhartha Gautama started, but with time, the teaching spread to other countries and different parts of the world, and different branches were created, and old texts and lessons were interpreted differently. And today, there exist 3 major branches of Buddhism. There's the Theravada, and that is the way of the elders. Then there's the Mahayana, which means greater vehicle, and the Vajrayana, which means thunderbolt vehicle or diamond vehicle. Not going to get too much into those in this episode. Perhaps we'll save that for a part 2. But moving on now to fact number 3, we look at suffering. Buddhism teaches that life is full of suffering. In fact, the Buddha said that suffering is inevitable. However, he found a way out of it eventually by following the Noble Eightfold Path. And individuals will still endure suffering at times throughout their life, but according to the teachings, this path will minimize the suffering until you reach nirvana. Fact number 2, let's look at the Wheel of Dharma. The Wheel of Dharma represents the Noble Eightfold Path, like I just mentioned in the previous fact, which consists of the following elements. There's right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is pretty much how a good Buddhist is supposed to act in order to avoid sufferings as much as possible in life. This will also ensure that the full focus is set on reaching enlightenment. And finally, we end off with fact number 1. personal responsibility, one of the most important teachings in Buddhism. Each person is responsible for their own enlightenment. According to the teachings, there is no savior like the Messiah that's coming to earth like other religions. It's up to each individual to keep good karma and work their way to attain enlightenment. No one else is capable of making somebody a Buddha. Only an individual can do that for themselves. Number 10, we have the lie of all Buddhists meditate. Meditation is often identified as a central practice of Buddhism. However, the majority of Buddhists throughout history, they don't meditate. Meditation has traditionally been considered a practice of monks, and even then, only certain monks. It's only up until about the 20th century that the practice of meditation had begun to be widely practiced by the common person. The lie number 9 is all Buddhists are vegetarians. Bhiksu, which is a Sanskrit term that translates as monk, literally means beggar. So Buddhist monks and nuns originally begged for their daily meal, and some still do this, and they ate whatever was given to them, and sometimes meat was given, so they ate that. Also, according to some sources, the Buddha suffered before he entered nirvana and attained enlightenment after he ate pork. After the Buddha's death though, vegetarianism began to be promoted in some Buddhist texts. But even today, not all Buddhists are vegetarians. Moving on to the lie number 8. No worship of gods in Buddhism. In certain types of Buddhism, like Japanese Buddhism, there is a wide variety of cosmic beings known as devas and spiritual beings known as bodhisattvas and Buddhas. And these beings dwell in various areas of the universe. Some even respond to people's prayers. Next up, let's look at Buddhism teaches that nothing exists. Buddhism doesn't actually teach this though. It does challenge the understanding of how things exist, and it teaches that beings and occurrences have no inherent existence. But Buddhism does not teach that there is no existence at all. The nothing exists misconception actually comes from a misunderstanding of the teaching of anatta and shunyata in Buddhism, but these are not beliefs of nothing exists. Rather, they teach that we understand existence in a limited way and a very biased way. Now, the lie number 6 is Buddhists believe in reincarnation. This one, yeah, it blew my mind. Now, if by reincarnation you mean the transferring of a soul into a new body after the former body dies, then yeah, no. The Buddha did not teach reincarnation. He taught that there was no soul even to transfer to another body. However, there is a Buddhist teaching of rebirth, not the same as reincarnation. The teaching says that it is the energy or conditioning created by one life that is reborn into another life, not the soul being reborn. According to Theravada Buddhism scholar Walpola Rahula, a person who dies here and is reborn elsewhere is neither the same person nor another. However, you don't have to believe in rebirth to be a Buddhist. It's not essential. Halfway in, the lie number 5 is karma is fate. If you didn't already know, the word karma refers to action, not fate. In Buddhism, karma is an energy created by willful action through thoughts, words, and deeds. Everyone is always creating karma with every second that passes, and the karma we create affects us at every moment of the day. So simply put, according to Buddhism, karma is an action, not a result, and the future is not set in stone. So just because you did something a particular way doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a specified outcome. The lie that I'm going to look at number 4 is karma punishes people. So pretty similar to the lie at number 5, but karma is not a cosmic system of justice and punishment. There is no unseen force that's manipulating karma to punish evil people. Buddhism teaches that karma is just as impersonal as gravity is. But karma is not the only force that makes things happen in the world. And if a flood destroys a city, it is not accurate to assume that karma made that flood happen because the people in the city did evil things. So karma is a force that can result in happy life circumstances or a miserable life circumstance, regardless of who the person is. Now let's talk about the lie number 3. Enlightenment is just eternal bliss. all of a sudden. People often think that becoming enlightened is like turning on a light bulb and then a person goes from being ignorant and frustrated to being blissful through one big aha moment. No, doesn't work that way. The Sanskrit term that's often translated as enlightenment actually means awakening. So most people awaken gradually over a period of time, or they're awakened through a series of opening experiences. Even the most enlightened people are not just floating around on a cloud of bliss all the time. They still live in the world, they still get sick, they still face danger, and they still stub their toes sometimes. So it's not all perfect. All right, for the lie at number 2, Buddhists worship the Buddha. The historical Buddha is considered to be a human being who attained enlightenment through his own efforts. Now, the Buddha did not specifically teach that there was no God. He just taught that believing in a god or gods was not useful to realizing enlightenment. Buddha also represents enlightenment itself, which is also the natural state of all beings according to Buddhism. And the images that we see of Buddha are objects of devotion and reverence, but are not worshipped as gods. And we finally made it to the last lie in this episode. At number 1, Buddhists can't have relationships. Now, when people hear that Buddhists practice something called non-attachment, they sometimes think that Buddhists can't have relationships with other people. But you see, at the root of attachment is believing that there is a self to attach and an other self to attach to. But Buddhism teaches that the self is an illusion and that ultimately nothing is separate. When one realizes this, there is no need for attachment. But that doesn't mean that Buddhists can't be in close and loving relationships with other people.